This student, weighing only 2 tons, had just been transferred to a school for delinquents. The person who showed him around the school at the beginning was the class representative, one of the future contenders to be the big fat guy's wife. In the future, he would also attract the attention of the most beautiful blonde in the school. She would even come every day to bother the fat guy wanting to date him. If this brute accepts, this could turn into a serious train wreck. But I strongly believe that in the end, the fat guy prefers brunettes. In the cafeteria, several delinquents wanted to harass the hot leader of the first-year class. They even pushed her, but our giga-fat guy saved her. Our hero doesn't wear a cape, he weighs 2 tons. This made the guys furious, so they came back again to torment him. But with just one cold look, they all shit their pants. Peace had returned to the fat guy. However, another problem had arisen. He caught the attention of a big fish. After breaking the hierarchy at the school, he would be punched in the face as punishment. At first, he thought the guy was very slow, so he dodged easily. The punch that was about to come next would break some bones. But remembering the promise he made to his mother to graduate peacefully, he stopped and was hit square in the face. He even pretended to be hurt, but it was all an act. The girl wanted him to go to the infirmary, but he hadn't even felt that punch. In the classroom, everyone seemed to mock him for being fat. He looked like Truck Kun sitting on the chair. He was that big. But all this mockery would soon come to an end. After a bully tried to strike a weakling and failed miserably, he got furious that everyone was laughing at him and decided to take his anger out on you-know-who. Little did this brat know the bad luck he would have that day. Our fat guy stood still like the wall of an impenetrable castle. The brat used all his strength to throw that slap, and just as it was about to land, the counterattack came. In a split second, he was hit so intensely that he blacked out instantly after crashing into the wall. No one in the room could believe it, not even the strongest one. And the most impressive thing is that he was sleeping. The new student's body simply reacted by reflex. Sometime later, during the lesson, all students sat still without uttering a single word, except for the boy who got knocked out. Everyone had chosen to remain calm. After observing this situation, the intrigued professor startled all the students by asking them about the reason for their unusual silence. The man who calmly wanted some clarification was met with horrified screams, affirming that everything was fine. The old man was shocked by the high schoolers' odd actions. All knew very well that they should never let themselves get discovered. The teacher, as well as the class president, was intrigued by this odd behavior. Meanwhile, one of the junior leaders was plunged into his thoughts. As a few minutes earlier, all were left, by what had happened. All began to wonder about the transfer student who defeated Hydra with a single punch. With that being said, one of the students quickly got up from his seat and rushed to share the news with the rest of the school, when suddenly someone addressed the entire class that his words were especially meant for the newest deliverer. Bullfist threatened to bully and harass anyone who shared this incident with others until the time of graduation. The boy then pointed out how everyone here would surely despise spending time with him. The gossiping girls who found him odd agreed with this fact, leaving him speechless. And so he demanded his guys to get rid of this mess, making them drag their knocked-out friend to his seat. Bullfist then began to wonder about his own weakness, leaving the others intrigued. Sometime later, after the class, he and his friends had gathered in a lone place. When asked about his condition, Huang and Sin affirmed, with a mouth barely able to speak, that he had assumed he had met his demise. When asked for the reason behind them gathering in secret, the leader affirmed that he himself was unsure, claiming that he wanted to personally question this particular individual. Just then he arrived, a moment to process the situation, became horrified, and started to foam from the mouth upon seeing the terrifying transfer student. Young Hu urged him to pull himself together, but the boy was too terrified to even understand simple words. Huang and Sin then rushed to hide from the one he assumed was a monster. Upon seeing this, his boss had no choice but to punch him in the face, in order to forcefully calm him down. All others were blown away by this one's stupidity. With that being said, the junior leader turned to the protagonist, and the men demanded an explanation. Nawuk then screamed from the top of his lungs, startling everyone before calmly claiming that he was here for a peaceful high school life. Before talking in a menacing tone and asking for their aid, and while the underdogs assumed that this was some kind of threat, when suddenly their leader reached out to the protagonist with the hand of friendship, all were left baffled, as the newcomer got along with their leader, accepting the handshake. Young Hu claimed that they should join efforts so that both of them could achieve this goal. The rest of the gang members were surprised by how peacefully this matter ended, so Bullfist affirmed that it was the right thing to do as his new friend was a kind person. One of them tried to argue that he still messed with them, only for the leader to state that they caused the problem first, which is why they urged them to forgive and get along, and so one after the other. The friend group introduced themselves to the protagonist and made peace with him, with the exception of the unconscious one. Shortly after, one of the students asked the fat one if he was aware of all the rules in this place, but upon being met with silence, he realized that the tall one ignored them all. With that being said, the boy explained how everyone was bound by a certain set of rules in this school, explained how the protagonist learned by himself the many rules, but should be aware that the grades followed a pecking order, and that each had an expected leader. The boy then informed him that the leader of their promotion had been elected recently, and when asked about his identity, he revealed him to be the barbaric brown bear. The one explaining was then asked if Park Ki-duk's status would be undisputed. So he clarified that his title of leader could be stripped away from him by anyone who could best him in a man-to-man duel, despite the task being challenging. The student's main that school life offered promotion was greatly influenced by its leader, and just as he was about to badmouth the current leader, his mouth was suddenly shut. The big one was confused, while his new friends were left terrified. Park Ki-duk, along with his many underlings, had arrived. When the barbarian demanded to know the reason behind their presence in such a place, Young Hu claimed that they were all here for the same reason. The henchman of the brown bear then began to mock him for being stupidly arrogant. The angered grade leader ordered them to purchase him bread, along with some strawberry milk, only for the rebellious Young Hu to boldly walk away and claim that Park Ki-duk was already too fat for such treats. The class leader, who was triggered by such provocation, once then rudely interrupted. Once he demanded to know who was showing arrogance, he was interrupted once again by someone asking him to be respectful and urging him and his gang to stop harassing others. The great leader was greatly annoyed by this humble arrogance and demanded the polite one clarify his statement, only to be met with no response. With that being said, one of the henchmen saw this as a chance to shine by humbling a third one, and so he made a menacing expression and informed Nawuk that the big man wanted to have a word with him. But upon being met with no response, he began to make fun of his weight, especially his overgrown chest. But just then, the boy realized that the protagonist was the same one who got sucker punched in the lunchroom and laughed at him for it. He then threatened to make that a protagonist's third embarrassing moment by punching him in the face and assumed his silence to be fear. But at the very moment he thought to make fun of our hero's hat, the calm one politely asked his body to restore the hat to its original place. The expression of our hero was so heartwarming that the boy began to shake. And so he gently grabbed the calm boy's hat before carefully putting it back in its place. The brown bear had a hard time processing what just happened, and just as he was about to lash out at his henchmen for this pathetic failure, someone suddenly called him. The boss turned around. The young thugs were now in the presence of ladies, and one of them asked if it was either of the first years. The barbarian tried to appear as polite as possible, as this was none other than the honored student of their promotion, Kim So-young. This one had stunning beauty, then noticed our protagonist, and was left disgusted by his fat appearance. The honorary student wanted the brown bear to come with her, as Suzy wanted to have a word with him. The big one grew even more excited, as this was none other than Park Suzy from the second years. With that being said, he happily rushed to meet with the pretty girl. His sudden leave intrigued his goons, so he stopped for a second and addressed them. Upon being commanded to take care of the rebellious ones, the weird mood of the goons was suddenly twisted to a more violent atmosphere. The one who originally went to bully the protagonist urged them to stop, doing the giant pressure that he suddenly defended. Upon seeing that his voice would be unheard, he decided to make a run for it before the worst could happen. And so in the blink of an eye, our hero and his friends found themselves surrounded, as when the leader expressed his command, his word would be absolute. And in case one ignores this word, he should just flee and change schools or risk being punished by the same boss that he had defied his authority, meaning that when the leader gives his orders, one could never disobey. Following that logic, the one with an afro explained that as first years, they are bound to respect the words of their leader. And with that being said, began the initiation of the devalued one as he punched the first student in the gut, making him suffer in pain. The rest couldn't believe this scandal. Naseon Wook, who saw it all, was particularly livid by this injustice. The henchmen then began to make fun of the dark looks given to them by Bullfist. But just as the afro pointed out that they had their hands tied, he was suddenly interrupted by none other than the protagonist, who, despite having a hard time following the rules, affirmed that someone who harasses others was in fact an enemy. One of the students who was annoyed by those noble words flipped off the hero, claiming that the words of their leaders were law, only to be silenced by the fat one raising his voice. Nawuk affirmed that the bullies are his enemies, and with that being said, our hero decided to bring the harassers under his control. Meanwhile, somewhere else within the school, where an oppressive meeting was being held, Zombie affirmed to her superiors that the brown bear had been officially appointed as the leader of the first years. This made someone laugh hysterically. Then someone asked the blonde boy who in his opinion would win in a fight between himself and the new junior leader. Young Jun affirmed that the brown bear was still a weak junior. The mad one quickly got off his chair, leaving Zombie uncomfortable as he asked him to clarify if he believes in his victory or not. The blonde one confirmed and claimed that the tall one with a red shirt was unique among his promotion. At that time, the protagonist, who claimed that the henchman was his enemy, decided to begin his subjugation, and so he jumped into the air before taking a fighting stance, followed by a second. Due to his footwork, everything had been set in place. All were left intrigued as this was step dance, a self-concealing secret technique known as hidden in the smoke that left everyone blind. One of the goons assumed he had seen a single word of the big hero, and so he immediately tried to take a swing at him. His powerful strike silently dissipated into the smoke. The confused bad guy was unable to locate the fat hero, who suddenly appeared behind him and whispered in his ear, scaring the soul out of him. At that very moment, the goon was blasted into the wall, and just as the rest of the group couldn't believe what had just happened, a second man had been taken by surprise and defeated in one blow. The Afro was unable to process the situation. All of them were now at the mercy of a kind soul who kept on hiding itself within the smoke. The student was left horrified, claiming that such a technique was considered cheating. But at that very moment, he found himself alone in an endless sea of white. But just as the smoke dissipated, the Afro, who was left stunned, had a hard time believing his own eyes. At the same time, in a safe spot, the friends of the protagonist began to scold him for his actions, which confused him, seeing how they chose to escape rather than fight back. One of them affirmed that they were doomed as their transgression of the rule would certainly call for the intervention of the seniors. The leader then affirmed that he would have engaged the plight if the protagonist hadn't done it first, and that they should take care about what to do next. All were left horrified as the seniors were surely going to look into their crime. Only then did the lead realize that someone was missing. Meanwhile, back at the Afro, the boy found himself in the presence of an overwhelming aura. Upon seeing this magnificence, the henchman immediately assumed him to be the true leader of the group. This individual was none other than a poor Hydra that had just woken up from a forced nap. When asked if this one was truly the main culprit, the student affirmed it with all his mind to Brown Bear, claiming that they had been assaulted by Huang and Sin. But the leader had his doubts. The goons affirmed to Brown Bear that the weak-looking one had truly attacked them and must be playing mind games to hide the fact that he is the real boss. Hydra apologized, claiming that he had no idea what was going on, before cracking a villainous smile and affirming his ignorance once again. The horrified goon then pointed out the evil expression the supposed leader just had on his face, making him look like a delusional man in the eyes of his boss. Park Ki-duk then asked him once again if he was truly behind it, only for Huang In-sin to deny it once again, wondering if he truly showed an evil smile. At that moment, someone entered the building, and just as Brown Bear was questioning the young man, this new presence affirmed to him that it was obvious that Hydra wasn't the one he was looking for. The intrigued boss turned around. His henchmen insisted that they had brought in the real me there. They were quickly silenced by their angry superior. With that being said, the henchman realized that he had mistaken an innocent student for the main culprit in a moment of panic. And so, Brown Bear finally realized that there was no way for the skinny blonde to have beaten up his henchman, meaning that Bullfist was the only suspect left. The two of them stood face to face once again. Park Ki-duk began to wonder what he should ask for in order to make up for this injustice. Yet upon being met with no response, he decided to bring up the seniors, claiming that Bullfist and his gang would be in trouble if they intervened, making him immediately apologize. The thugs considered this a weakness of character and began to laugh at him for it, only for their leader to urge them to have some respect, leaving them humbled and silenced. Young-hoo wanted his enemy to inflict punishment upon him and leave his men alone. Ki-duk asked about the fate of the one he had impacted, so he neither affirmed that he would give up anything for his freedom, seeing how Hydra didn't personally harm him. Brown Bear ordered him to scram off. The boy, who was terrified, received a head gesture from his leader urging him to get out. With that being said, the defeated In-sin stood up and thanked his leader before finally exiting the room. The great leader then recalled the words of Bullfist and asked his men not to go all out from the start. Upon seeing how the henchmen were looking forward to this beatdown, Young-hoo prepared himself for the worst. The first student ran towards Bullfist and immediately kicked him in the stomach. The young man could feel the kick before falling on his back. The boy then braced himself and kicked him in the gut once again. Brown Bear looked in disbelief as his subordinates began to stomp on his enemy. But upon seeing how well he was holding up, Brown Bear was suddenly triggered. Afro, who was having the time of his life, was suddenly grabbed by the shoulder and casually tossed away by his bloodthirsty leader. Upon seeing this, Bullfist began to expect the worst. Seeing how well the boy was taking the beatdown, the leader also decided to take his swing at him. He then grabbed the young man by the leg and prepared himself to twist it. All were left horrified as their leader claimed that Young-hoo shouldn't fight back and should obediently submit to it. And with that being said, a horrifying thing was inflicted. Shortly after, the inrushing friends of Bullfist rushed towards his bed and were left horrified by what they had seen. The boy greeted them with a smile. He, who was in a pitiful state, was glad to see his friends. Young Tai was greatly angered by this atrocity, yet the boss affirmed that the matter had been closed, with the hot-blooded one wanting to go and get revenge, only to be stopped by their leader. Jung Tai was unable to understand how Yun-Hu was so calm, claiming that the condition they put him in was unacceptable, especially his broken leg. Bullfist claimed that he had injured his leg due to a motorcycle accident, and while the others believed him, Jung Tai still had his doubts. With that being said, he asked his boss about the next course of action, yet the one in the hospital affirmed that he had no idea. When it was pointed out how Brown Bear and his men might injure him once again, the boy reassured his gang, claiming that he would apply for BTS once he fully recovers. He affirmed his words once again and asked his friends to always watch themselves. The term BTS confused the newcomer. One of the men affirmed to the boss that he shouldn't mind them and should worry about himself. Bullfist jokingly claimed that he was looking forward to some free time outside of school, and while the happy conversation was going on, Jung Tai noticed the big one leaving. All were focused on the injured leader, and then noticed the giant exiting the room before walking away. Just then, someone rushed to the big guy, demanding to know where he was going. Now Luke stopped walking. The boy urged the fat one to cease whatever action he was taking. Jung Tai claimed that the protagonist was at fault for what happened there, stating that all of the group would have immediately sold him out if it wasn't for their neighbor. Jung Tai then claimed that Bullfist had never seen our hero as a friend, which is why he urged him in his place. The boy threatened that if he ever caused a scene, he would immediately report him to the seniors, earning him a dark glare that startled him. Nawook apologized, claiming that he was a jerk, and that he enjoyed acting as such. The student had a hard time following, and so the protagonist demanded 3 days to plan things out, affirming that he only needed this short period. Before affirming it once again, this was followed by our hero's usual cold silence. Jung Tae had a hard time processing what just happened. Nawook reassured the boy as he finally revealed his left arm. The boy couldn't believe his eyes. What he saw was hard to fathom, as the one that showed it promised to make up for his mistakes. Our hero wanted to teach a lesson to anyone who harms his loved ones. Everyone received a notification, including the injured Bullfist. BTS battle target system had been initiated. All were left intrigued as a designated fight between first years was announced. The leader of the first years, Brown Bear, was demanded to fight a certain opponent that left everyone amazed, as it was none other than the transfer student himself, labeled as an underdog. With his tattoo finally out, our hero would now consider all of his upcoming actions as a way to defend himself. BTS, which is also known as Battle Target System, had some indisputable rules. The first being that only those not connected by the seniors were allowed to obtain the tickets to see the match. Rule number 2 forced any great leader to immediately accept the challenge if it is proposed by an underdog who is allowed to only fight each nominated leader once. The third rule implied that the fights would be conducted unarmed and in all fairness. Rule number 4 stated that if an underdog became leader, all of his peers within the same grade had no choice but to submit to him. The last rule implied that the final and ultimate judgment belonged to the king of the school. According to Young-Hu, Will explained passionately, only to be stared at strangely by the others at the hospital, seeing how he was talking alone. The embarrassed boy found his face red as everyone assumed that he had suffered some sort of brain damage. His phone suddenly began to ring. Hydra asked him if he had a clear view. Bullfist began to ponder the thought of this one. Now, in the middle of the arena, Nawook was about to do the unthinkable. Just like that, the two giants were now face to face. All were left intrigued by how early the BTS matches commenced, considering the official ceremony of the first-tier leader's success hadn't been held yet. Only then did the students realize that only those selected by the third years were allowed to take part in BTS, which made them wonder about the identity of the protagonist. And despite him being a mysterious soul, they couldn't argue, seeing how it had already been approved by the king of the school. At that moment, the first years were left startled as they had finally arrived. Their seniors had made their entrance. All students stood still and adjusted their postures to greet the second years. Oh Chang-seok, the 98 boss and the strongest among the second years, annoyingly demanded to know the reason behind the chaos. Zombie pointed out that the entire school was in shambles while his friends stood silent. Susie gazed at the menacingly calm giant and was left baffled by him, as he was the kind of man she liked. Upon falling head over heels for the protagonist, the girl suddenly ran away to her classmates in treatment. Some of the students followed her while running through the room. Her beauty caught the attention of the first years. The intrigued Brown Bear was one of them. With that being said, he turned around and formally greeted the second years. The seniors gazed at the transfer student who stood still and demanded he show some respect. With that being said, they ignored him and kept going their way. The second year then decided to take a seat. When asked about the hero who was behind the entire problem, Zombie explained how he was a transfer student who arrived yesterday. The 98 found himself interested in the fat one who requested a BTS a day after arriving. At that moment, the second years were overwhelmed by a sudden pressure, seeing how their seniors were about to arrive. All second years stood up as a sign of respect. The brown bear, as well as the tiger, could also feel this crushing pressure. The boss of the second years couldn't help but admire the power of their seniors. And just like that, they finally arrived. The last years finally made their entrance. Oh Chang-seok urged his men to immediately stand firm and still to form an agreement with the third years. All saluted the seniors with one strong and united voice. Number 4 found this greeting to be too loud, while number 6 pointed out how long it had been since the last BTS. Number 5 seemed tired, while number 3 remained unfazed. Kim Tae-hee pointed out how hard it was to see Chang-seok, the leader of the second years, tried his best to be humble. He leaned a little forward to see ahead and was left horrified as this one person stood among the third years. One step from this individual, and the entire school began to tremble. This powerful presence was none other than the leader of the third year, Ma Seok-pil, who is also known as King. With that being said, the ruler of the school finally made his entrance. All immediately regained their seats, including King. All were left intrigued by this person, as he was the one running the school. No one could avert their eyes from his stunning looks. Ma Seok-pil began to speak, claiming that he would keep it brief and that BTS hadn't been seen in a long time. He then pointed out how many were wondering about the reason someone with no name, like today's challenger, was allowed to partake in BTS. So King affirmed that it was his will with a menacing tone, leaving everyone startled. With his subjects affirming that they understood him, the king decided to begin the festivities. And so, Zombie would play the role of arbiter in the BTS first-tier match, opposing the great leader, the brown bear, who had many followers, to the transfer student, who had a few friends backing him up, including an injured group leader. The blonde one explained that the match would end once one of them admitted defeat, fell, or if some sort of problem occurred. The senior then touched his juniors in their private parts and affirmed that it was the only area they were forbidden from touching, and with that being said, the match finally commenced. Cheers filled the arena. As Park Ki-duk launched the first punch, Na-wook immediately blocked. The iron defense quickly caught up with the second attack. The great leader bombarded the newcomer with a barrage of punches, only for him to stand on the defensive. This triggered the brown bear, who considered the lack of offense as some kind of underestimation. Upon assuming that the transfer student was looking down on him, he left in great rage. He launched a series of powerful punches that managed to push Na-wook back. His henchmen were particularly pleased by his performance, only for the third year to affirm that the one dominating the fight was in fact his opponent. All were intrigued by the kind soul who tanked all of the incoming punches. But the most stunning part was the fact that it was the attacker who seemed out of breath. Park Ki-duk realized that he was in a tough situation, as despite being the one attacking, he couldn't help but feel that he was the one taking damage. And just as he began to wonder about the plan of the protagonist, he addressed him with his usual casual tone, urging him to simply apologize so he could show him mercy. But the prideful brown bear refused to do so. Our hero affirmed that this would be his last opportunity to make things right. The great leader was shocked to see himself so exhausted, and so the annoyed one assumed that this tiredness was the work of a particular individual. 3 hours ago, the brown bear informed the afro that his opponent would be the transfer student who got humiliated by Sudako, and just as the skinny one began to talk about how easy this challenge would be, he suddenly bumped into someone. The thug turned to the one he had bumped into and urged him to apologize, only to quickly realize that this was none other than Sudako. The third year was particularly annoyed to be casually called by his name, so the junior corrected himself and formally apologized for his arrogance. The third year then gazed into the giant in front of him, before pointing out how this entire promotion lacked respect. Sudako was particularly interested in the leader of the new juniors, and just as young Gana 1 began to babble disrespectfully, the oldest quickly charged up at him, and in a flash they found themselves a few inches away from each other's bodies. Sudako smiled and affirmed that the brown bear would lose. The tall one asked him to clarify, so he explained how he would be unable to triumph over the protagonist, pointing out how weak he was and claiming that he should pray for the match to be cancelled. The henchman of the tall one tried to reassure him that the senior was only speaking as such in order to save himself. Yet even so, this greatly troubled him. As he began to doubt his own victory, The brown bear was snapped back to reality by the kind soul who urged him to respond. With that being said, the class leader once left greatly angered. One of the watchers realized that the boss of the first years was more excited than he was back in the first year competition. He kept on bombarding our hero with fists, dealing punch after punch, but to his great shock, his opponent was left unimpressed. His towering self seemed to get even bigger. As he resorted to his technique absorption, none could believe their eyes. With the technique now complete, Nawok pointed out how his opponent had refused the mercy he had bestowed upon him, and so he recalled an old saying, claiming that everyone should be matched up with someone of equal strength. The boy who said those very words took a moment to process them, before deciding to rebirth the word by charging up at his opponent in order to cleanse him from his sins. The protagonist urged him to watch closely. The brown bear found himself overwhelmed by this odd strength. Our hero then decided to resort to his technique, known as right fist, heart cleaning, 50 pounds that he executed with only his right hand. The first-tier boss, getting beaten up, finally realized that his opponent was mad, and just like that, the brown bear found himself under a rain of blows. With that being said, Park Ki-duk found himself unable to breathe. His henchmen couldn't believe their eyes. The tall one was unable to believe the power of his opponent. Our hero urged him to apologize so that everything could be settled. Before pulling out a pack of cigarettes from his pocket, the arbiter immediately called him out for trying to smoke, which was against the rules. Meanwhile, the brown bear was unable to accept the fact that he was about to lose as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a brass knuckle. Before hitting our hero with it on the head in a sneak attack, to his friend's horror, blood had been splattered on the ground, blood belonging to an innocent man. Upon seeing this, none could believe their eyes, and so they screamed that the brown bear had broken the rules, seeing how he resorted to a weapon in order to knock his opponent down. The second ears were blown away by the turn of events, while Susie had a hard time believing what just happened. The ref himself was surprised, but just as he was about to disqualify the boy for using a weapon, he was interrupted by the sound of laughter. He tried to call the cheetah, only to be interrupted once again. The annoyed zombie turned around to see who this insolent one was and was left horrified, as it was none other than the king himself, who was laughing his heart out. His sinister laughter made a chill run down every student's spine. The zombie tried to stop the fight, only for Boss 97 to urge him to resume it. None of the students were convinced, seeing how one of the sacred rules had been broken. The ref tried to argue, yet there was no room for discussion, and with that being said, the king urged him to resume the fight, screaming his order to the entire school. His voice alone created a powerful shockwave that even managed to make some students lose their consciousness. The second year found himself in front of a mighty power that no one could fight. This was the true power of the school's ruler, and with that being said, he had no choice but to resume the game. Bullfist was particularly irritated by this madness, and so he tried to get up from the bed despite his injury, only for the nurse to stop him. The devastated Hydra fell to the ground, unable to fathom such madness, seeing how the protagonist was injured and already down. Susie also questioned the word of the king. Meanwhile, the brown bear, who had lost it, recalled the words of Sudako regarding him being beneath the transfer student. The king urged him to end the fight and saw the barbarian rush to end our hero. But at that very moment, someone saved the fat one by tanking the punch with his face before falling to the ground. This was none other than Young Tai, who startled his friend with his heroism. With that being said, the current leader of Grade 1 found two underdogs on the ground in front of him, leaving him confused. But at that moment, the overwhelming ruler of the school urged him to finish the fight. Back then, a certain man was lashing out verbally and physically at someone in anger. This was none other than the young Park Ki-duk, who despised life and was claimed to be useless by this man. A few years later, while fighting, he couldn't help but find reason in his words. The boy then landed a devastating punch that allowed him to triumph over his opponent. The young bear was somewhat thankful to this person who made him realize how durable and willful he was, having received the cheers of the nearby children. The boy who assumed himself useless finally found something he was good at, and despite every encounter ending with his opponents at his feet, Ki-duk realized that the love of others was relative to the number of victories he could achieve, meaning that he was forced to achieve victory no matter the cost, claiming that he would boost his views if he ever tasted defeat. But at that moment, he was breaking out from the world of dreams by the protagonist, who asked him to focus on the fight. The brown bear was left horrified as the protagonist claimed that there was no turning back from his actions now. Even the third years could feel a horrifying pressure, as Nawuk claimed that he would guide the boy to redemption. And with that being said, a seal had been used. The armed young man charged at him once again, only for him to easily evade with his technique, backstep. With that being said, our hero braced himself, leaving even the king shocked. and so he was finally ready to throw his punch. The overwhelming counter-truth had finally been unleashed. All of the spectators were left speechless, especially Park Ki-duk, who found himself in front of an overwhelming force. Just like that, the final punch had been landed, and with this underdog's victory, our hero had finally been crowned as Boss 99. Back then, Suzy, who took a look at the contestants, found herself with red cheeks that the girl had fallen head over heels for our chunky protagonist, who was the kind of man she liked. She was also particularly fond of his round belly. Upon seeing him getting hit in the head, Suzy immediately lashed out in anger, earning her a teasing smile from the Korean beagle, which left her a little embarrassed. And when our hero was in the fight, she realized that her choice was the right one. And with that being said, the girl finally made her decision. Sometime later at the school, some first years who entered their class were left utterly baffled after seeing Suzy of the second years. They were particularly surprised to see her in their humble classroom. One of the students tried to take back his seat from her, only for her to threaten him in a menacing tone for daring to speak to her. The boy, who was flattered by her words, decided to allow her to keep sitting there. Upon seeing the mean beauty converse casually with the protagonist, all felt envious of his astonishing luck. Young-hoo politely asked her to exit the classroom, which left Suzy today good as so much doesn't even consider the human while speaking with her. The protagonist decided to ask her the same thing, claiming that the teacher would arrive soon. Suzy, who was surprised by how much of a good student her new love interest was, decided to make her leave but claimed that she needed his number first. With that being said, the girl made her leave, claiming that she would contact her honey later. All boys found themselves drowning in jealousy upon hearing the beautiful Suzy refer to the class leader as such. Meanwhile, the class president, who observed it all in silence, looked at what she had in hand and was left disappointed. A little later, a running student made his way into a first-year class and informed them that the new boss ordered everyone to gather in the auditorium. The ex-henchmen of the Brown Bear were left horrified, seeing how badly they had treated the new man in charge. Yet the other students seemed to look forward to this gathering. With that being said, all thugs of the first year made their way out of their classrooms and headed towards the auditorium. Upon opening the door, they found themselves in front of menacing stares, as well as an overwhelming back. The students who ignored the reason behind the gathering found the atmosphere to be overwhelming. The two bullies were particularly anxious, yet upon being greeted by the boss, the Afro was the first to greet them back. And so after a small silence, the new leader shouted with all of his might, immediately imposing himself upon the other students. The kind soul affirmed that he was no leader but a simple boy from the capital, and so he jumped off the stage in order to land on their level, claiming that they should all get along from now on. The thugs had a hard time following. Nawook explained how he didn't want to be their boss but their friend instead. Bullfist was particularly pleased by this kindness. He wanted them to see him as someone who could help them in times of need, claiming that they would surely be forced to one day rely on one another. He then claimed that everyone was useful and that they should live their lives with purpose from now on before forbidding them from robbing other kids. Nawook then asked them to always remember that one should be placed against an opponent of the same level. In the end, the gentle giant claimed that they should all repent together in order to graduate in peace, and asked all who agreed with him to scream, "I." With that, he took a deep breath and shouted it first, only to be met with a confused silence. Some of the embarrassed students assumed that it was some sort of battle cry. Only then was it screamed by Young Tai, followed by Young Hu as well as Huang In-sin. The entire class of our hero responded positively to his demand, and with that being said, all except the forcefully shouted "I" in front of their new leader, who was left satisfied. The boy realized how much of a kind soul the protagonist was, claiming him to be a gorgeous person, unlike him. Young Tai began to look up to the boy from the capital, and just like that, Nawook had gained an army of new friends. 7 days had passed since then. First-year thugs had stopped bullying the weaker ones. The nerd affirmed to the two students that he was a rank at this game, making the two of them urge him to add them as friends, which was a perfect example of the peace that installed itself among the junior promotion. Suzy asked the hero if he had something to do after school. She proposed to go grab lunch, or even go to karaoke, as well as suggesting going into a DVD room, leaving everyone jarred, only for the fat boy to affirm that he had an appointment, leaving Suzy with a dark expression, having realized that he was going to see another girl. But to her shock, the boy affirmed that it was a study date. Nawook wanted to study with the class president today. The girl immediately turned her head to see who he was talking about, and upon following the gaze of the other students, she found herself looking at a nerdy girl focused on her studies. With that being said, the second-year love interest wanted to go study but demanded a date from him, claiming that they should go on one tomorrow. Bullfist affirmed that he and his friends had already reserved the bus for the next day, leaving the girl irritated. Susie even claimed that he would be in big trouble if he ever bothered her again before shooing him off. Young-hoo's friends began to pity him, seeing how unpopular he was with girls. That same day after classes, the class president found herself with the new grade leader. Kame Min-ju then claimed that her presence might cause trouble, leaving the boy intrigued. So she explained how them being together wasn't pleasing their senior. The class president wanted to avoid any misleading situation, seeing how she was only here to tutor the transfer student. She then tilted her head only to see the gentle giant looking at her weirdly. Just as confusion began to settle in, he suddenly patted her head and affirmed that she was adorable, leaving the girl with a blushing face as she urged them. Shortly after, inside a cafe, the class president was giving the protagonist some English lessons. But as she kept on tutoring our hero, he suddenly began to yawn. Upon seeing this, the girl decided to stop the lesson for today, which the boy had no problem with. With that being said, they decided to make their leave. But while grabbing her stuff, the girl noticed the items in her backpack. She then gave the medicine to the protagonist, seeing how injured he was due to his last fight. She struggled to explain herself, only for the boy to affirm that his senior had already offered the same medicines to him, and so the class president decided to take them back. But upon seeing how sad the girl seemed, our hero placed the plaster on his head, expressed his gratitude for the medicine, claiming that he shall use it while leaving her overjoyed. With that being said, our heroes decided not to tarry any longer, in order to catch the train. Meanwhile, the past goons of Kidok struggled to contact him. One of them asked the Afro about his opinion regarding the new boss. The third one pointed out that he was a kind person whom they could get along with, yet the boy had a hard time believing it, as he brought up the glorious era that they had under the brown bear. But at that moment, the student bumped into someone. Afro immediately apologized for his carelessness. The thug decided to make a scene, claiming that his arm was hurting a lot, leaving the boy to apologize once again before making his leave. Only then did the grown man demand the boy to come closer. Afro realized that he was in a tough situation. His friend urged him to keep it peaceful, as fighting for nothing could only bring problems. The boy had no choice but to resonate with that logic as he apologized to the man once again. This one began to mock him for acting so politely, before claiming that this entire generation was deprived of manners. His friend tried to intervene gently, claiming that it was a mistake on their part, only to get suddenly punched by the grown man for apologizing on behalf of his friend. Upon seeing how violent this bully was, Afro decided to attack, only to miss and receive a kick in the stomach. As the boy fell to the ground, the man began to mock him. He then urged his friends to help him jump the high school student. And with that being said, the young thug found himself under a rain of flip-flops, as they kept on insulting and hitting. He then spotted a brick nearby and decided that he wouldn't take it anymore. At that moment, the friends of the boy restrained the adult, and so, in a burst of adrenaline, the high schooler went for the kill, which his friends didn't expect, when suddenly, a hand stopped him. The angered boy turned to see who was interfering and found it to be his senior, Su Dogko. The one wearing a tank top once left infuriated that he was about to be hit with a brick, only for Dogko to claim that he had already contacted the authorities. With that being said, the grown-ups had no choice but to leave defeated, as the high schooler demanded them to scram, seeing how they knew what was best for them. A few minutes ago, while working at his job, the third-year student spotted a nearby fight. Upon recognizing some of his juniors partaking in it, Su Dako claimed that they had nothing better to do. Only then did he realize that the one lying on the ground secretly grabbed a brick. Having realized what he was planning to do, the senior had no choice but to rush in order to prevent a murder. Later on, the juniors thanked their senior, who affirmed that it was nothing, only for them to bow down and thank him once again. Afro raised his hat to see if the senior was still there. Sudoko decided to speak, but as the terrified juniors expected punishment or scolding, he just advised them not to ruin their lives with a single action, leaving them deeply thankful. With that being said, the third-year student finally walked away. Sudoko then realized that he had just acted like an old man, only to be called in by his boss, who urged him to hurry, making him rush back to work. With that being said, the boys decided to go back home after a long day. Later that evening, Afro asked the others in the group chat to enjoy their night while he searched for the missing leader. Only then did the high schooler spot a girl with 3 boys. Upon realizing that it was a familiar figure, he was left particularly annoyed, seeing how he had asked her time and time again not to bring her lovers near his house, only to be left horrified upon realizing what was happening, as the 3 hitting on her were no strangers either. The girl immediately got away from them as she urged the boys to stop their nonsense. The man, who was greatly angered by this rejection, decided to resort to violence, only for the Void to suddenly intervene and take the slap on the girl's behalf, making her surprised at how quickly he had appeared. The annoyed thug began to wonder about the identity of the party pooper, only to realize, upon taking a good look at him, that it was the same high schooler he had beaten up before. This greatly angered him as he assumed that the minor was a stalker. Afro urged them to go away, claiming that he had already contacted the authorities, which left the delinquent even more enraged, seeing how the boy assumed that bringing up the cops would be enough to scare them off. And with that being said, he kicked him in the stomach with all his might, making him fall in pain on the ground to the girl's horror. The high schooler desperately tried to get up. The girl screamed at the delinquent for what he had done. Seeing how annoying these two were, the man decided to take care of them, starting with the girl he launched himself at, only for the boy to intervene once again and shield her with his body for a second time, making him fall on the ground just like last time. The thug was left angered once again by the high schooler, and so he ruthlessly kicked him in the face before starting to stomp on him, now under the feet of the delinquent. Just like last time, the young man found himself very annoyed. At that moment, he spotted a rock nearby. Upon seeing it, the first thought that came to his mind was to use it as a weapon in order to finally terminate his bully. Only then did he remember the wise words of his senior. The boy was greatly irritated upon remembering something so rightful at his lowest moment. Only then was the sound of a whistle heard. The delinquents had finally been spotted. Seeing this, they immediately decided to flee the scene. But while they ran away, the officer ran towards the boy. He quickly checked up on him, so Afro affirmed that he was unharmed before thanking the man for his concern. The girl was baffled to discover that he had the ability to express gratitude, which left the beaten-up one greatly annoyed. Even so, he decided to drop the matter and urge her to go back to their home. The lady then held her savior's hand as he requested dinner, which made her scold him for not having eaten anything the entire day. The next day at school, the young man told his friend about his late-night adventure and began to complain about the bad luck he had. At that moment, one of the three was left alerted, as the boss along with his friends were heading their way, and so the three of them corrected their posture and stood out of the way. The boss along with his men passed by them. Afro then opened his eyes to see if the one in charge had finally left, only to find the gentle giant gazing into his soul. The scared boy asked if there was a problem. Boss 99 affirmed that they didn't have to stand aside. Afro was left confused, as the protagonist explained that such things shouldn't be done among friends. He then addressed the boy known as Deoku, baffled to see that the boss knew his name, asking him about his injuries. As Afro claimed that he had fallen on the stairs, his boss responded with "Ga," leaving him utterly confused. The protagonist then shouted "Ga" once again, demanding to know the name of the one who injured him. Deoku tried to cling to his story. Now, nose to nose with his new friend, our hero asked him if he had brushed his teeth. He then shouted "I," covering the one he urged to get rid of his horrible breath and saliva. The rest of the boys affirmed that they were prepared as well. This sudden support surprised the three delinquents. Nowook was now infuriated as someone had mistreated his peer Deoku. Later on, the protagonist and his friends went to search for the person in question. This part of town seemed lively and festive. Hydra came rushing and asked his friends if they had heard a certain noise. The boys were left intrigued, and so he affirmed. It was the sound of his young blood pumping in this magnificent and pleasurable place. Just as he went running, claiming that he would get home late, he spotted a beautiful lady. Hydra immediately approached her. But just as he was about to make his move, the disgusted one immediately asked him to go away, calling him an idiot. She kept bombarding him with insults as she was annoyed by the fact that he even dared to approach her. And with that being said, she made her leave, claiming that his face was repulsive. With that, the friends of the boy couldn't help but pity him, as this experience was pretty harsh. Deoku affirmed to the protagonist that he didn't need to okay such matters for their sake. His friend agreed, claiming that they weren't sure if the aggressor would be present in this place, proposing to head back, only for the leader to claim that they should go have some fun after this. At that moment, Afro finally spotted the man they were looking for. With that being said, our hero called out to his friend and firmly urged them to move. With that being said, the high schoolers made their way to the location of the thug. The guards at the door who saw them coming asked them to go away as no minors were allowed inside. The gentle giant affirmed that they were searching for someone inside, yet those at the door couldn't care less, and so our hero had no choice but to resort to his technique, Eyes of the Sexy Tiger. He then quickly ordered them to move aside, and just like that, those who once forbade the high schoolers from entering welcomed our hero inside the building. Meanwhile, his friends who had seen it all had a hard time understanding the event that unfolded right in front of them. Meanwhile, inside, cups were being banged. The thug and his friends were having a good time. He affirmed to the girl with him that he had stumbled upon the same annoying guy yesterday, and when she asked about what happened, he pridefully claimed that he had beaten him to evolve. The girl claimed this to be amusing, only to be then left startled. All suddenly felt scared and looked towards the door, only to find an imposing pair of eyes staring at them. With that being said, Boss 99 entered the room. Upon seeing the afro, the grown man recognized the high schooler and immediately began to laugh at him, claiming that he must have gone crying to his friends. Daioku began to feel uncomfortable. His friend affirmed that they only demanded a simple apology from him. The girl immediately began to mark our hero. Hopefully, she asked him with imposing eyes not to interfere in this matter that doesn't concern her. Just like that, the lady found herself blushing at a minor. Upon seeing this, the thug slammed his scalp onto the table. His friends began to fear the worst. The man had been greatly irritated by the fat high schooler, whom he urged to go away, but upon being met with no response, the man had no choice but to repeat his words. Naseon Wook affirmed once again that they just wanted the man to truthfully apologize to his friend, yet the delinquent couldn't help but see this as a bunch of nonsense. Having had enough, the grown man decided to take a swing at the high schooler. With that being said, the gentle giant decided to resort to a secret technique in order to reinforce his abs, in order to protect himself from the incoming punch, and break the arm of the thug in the process. The man found himself cursing in pain. Our protagonist looked at his friend and explained to him that the thugs didn't want to give him the justice he deserved. With that being said, he affirmed that he and the rest of the game could get violent for his sake. The afro had a hard time believing it. Boss 99 explained that he considers his friend like his own family, meaning that they should always help each other out. Our hero affirmed to Daioku that he sees him as family. With that being said, the boy pointed out how useless he was and how much of an idiot his boss is. With that being said, Afro expressed to the soul boy gratitude from the bottom of his heart as he finally acknowledged him as his true leader. And so, after a quick fist bump, Nawook asked his friend if he was aware of their next action. The boy cracked a smile and affirmed that they shall guide the thugs to redemption. With that being said, the one with a broken arm found himself in front of the protagonist using his technique, Predator. Just like that, the high schooler emitted an aura that overwhelmed the present adult males. This technique used by the minor had another effect on the grown women. The friends of the gentle giant realized that the action had already started. The thug found himself greatly annoyed. Nawook affirmed to him that he had thrown away the mercy he had shown him, and just as the thug was about to bring up his identity to intimidate the boy, this one urged him to stop acting like a child. Now in a rage blacker than ever, the man demanded to know the origins of the boy before swearing to terminate him. Our hero affirmed to him that he doesn't need to know such information, seeing how it was the grown man who had made a mistake. The thug grew even more terrified. Nawook then explained that even if one was unable to live like a saint, he should avoid causing any trouble to others. Just like that, the gentle giant kindly advised him to get a fresh start. When suddenly someone came in asking for Jinsu, the high schoolers were left intrigued as a bunch of men that resembled a gang suddenly appeared. The thug began to laugh, claiming that his attackers were now doomed. As the one smoking asked for Jinsu once again, Hydra found himself startled, as he and his friends had now been cornered by the men in suits. Just then, someone came from behind the man. This one was intrigued by the many minors in the establishment. Huang and Sin began to sweat bullets as this one approached. Even Jung Tai and Young Hu were left alerted. With that being said, he finally stopped. The giant man, who presented himself as a graduate from Gukyang from the 94 promotion, demanded the high schoolers to present themselves. The boys realized that they were now in a tough situation, as this one was someone from an old promotion who had graduated from their high school, and just as they began to argue whether begging could save their lives or not, the man pointed out their silence and was immediately angered by it. Jung Tai tried to claim that they were only walking by, yet the man had a hard time believing him, seeing how he was inside a building forbidden to minors. With the negotiation being a total failure, the one in charge gave his orders, asking his men to wrap up the intruders. The grown-ups began to look forward to the chance of beating little boys, who realized that they were in a tough situation. Bullfist realized that any wrong movement could pull them into deeper trouble, which is why he asked the protagonist for a plan. The boss emerged from the door, took a short moment to analyze the situation. Afro affirmed to him that they would follow him regardless of his decision. His two friends affirmed that they were all prepared. Hydra was particularly fired up. Jung Tai, who agreed with them, asked the leader to give his command. All looked forward to the decision of their friend, who cracked a gentle smile. Now Wook explained that conversation was currently useless, which is why they should resort to violence first before asking his men to not cause any damage out of proportion. And as the leader shouted, "Aye!" all of the pack responded to his war cry with powerful voices. Just like that, the high schoolers were able to intimidate grown men. Upon seeing this, the boss was particularly angered as these were no more than simple minors. And so, the one from 94 ordered the attack, making his forces snap back to reality and charge at the children, who decided to face them fearlessly. Just as one of the men was about to make the first punch, he was met with a door in the face. The waiter who entered the room was none other than Su Dako. The juniors were left intrigued as they had stumbled upon their senior who found them in an unexplainable situation. Seeing how their intruders recognized the server, the henchmen immediately assumed him to be part of their gang. The senior was facing trouble once again due to his juniors, as the three guards immediately charged at him. The alerted third year immediately dodged the first punch. He kept on evading without raising his fists. Su Dako demanded to know the reason behind this aggressiveness. He then dodged a punch that landed on his plate, and just like that, what was on it broke down on the floor. This greatly annoyed Su Dako, who evaded the man's hit once again, only this time he grabbed him by the collar and shoved his knee deep into his chin. With that, the first of the three had been rendered down, while the second man tried to take him from behind, only for the high schooler to duck and leave his opponent no room to react before finally uppercutting. The angry server wasn't done just yet, as he bombarded his opponent with a barrage of fists. The henchman couldn't take it any longer. Su Dako decided to go for the final blow, as he kicked the man with such power that he sent him flying into the wall. Upon seeing this, the third attacker was left horrified. Only then did he notice the bloodthirsty high schooler ready to attack him. Su Dako then delivered a powerful punch that was strong enough to make the grown man lose consciousness. It was at this moment that he realized that he would be unable to keep his job. So all students were doing their best in order to overwhelm their adult adversaries, all except for one. Hydra found himself defeated on the ground. The aggressor took great pleasure in stomping him, while suddenly met with a flying fist that knocked him down on his back. Young Tai immediately went to check up on his friend, only for Insen to claim that he was fine and that he saw something on the ground. The boy was then quickly left alerted as his friend who tried to help him was about to be the object of a sneak attack. Suddenly someone rammed the attacker and sent him to his comrade's feet. This was none other than Deoku, who asked his friend to not get distracted. Jomtai found himself greatly pleased by this, as he then expressed his gratitude towards his savior. The one that the boy knocked down quickly got up and affirmed to the high schoolers that they shall pay for what they have done. Meanwhile, two high schoolers found themselves surrounded by many adults. Bullfist was now back-to-back with his senior. The junior demanded an explanation, and upon hearing Su Dako complain about them causing problems in his workplace, the boy finally understood why his senior, who worked this late, was always tired at school despite claiming that it didn't matter to him. Su Dako immediately called out his junior for his bad manners, making the boy point out how often such complaints happen. With that being said, the senior affirmed that everyone in Promotion 99 was the same to him as he punched one of his many opponents. And while everyone was caught up in the fight, the protagonist felt something drawing near. Someone then praised them for their performance, claiming that they were just normal high schoolers. The man in charge was left excited, claiming that it had been long since he had the chance to humble someone. With that being said, the two bosses were now face to face. Young Tai, along with Young Hu, as well as the rest of the high schoolers, tilted their eyes towards the two giants who gave each other dark stares. The adult decided to make the first move, and in the blink of an eye, the junior found a fist under his cap, a fist that he easily evaded. Our hero remained unfazed as he kept on evading the incoming hits, even if some managed to scratch him a little. But in the end, the adult landed a serious punch that managed to push the fat miner away. Yet even so, the protagonist's expression remained the same. His opponent, on the other hand, was left baffled, seeing how easily he evaded all of his attacks. This made the man even more excited. With that being said, he urged our hero to drop the act in order to save himself. Seeing the man in charge get rid of his weight bands made the henchman realize that this day would end with someone's injury. With the weights on the ground, our hero was intrigued by them being 1 kilogram. The man then claimed that he was offended as his opponent took him for a fool. He could easily tell that the protagonist wasn't going all out against him. The adult then affirmed that the voice would change attitudes immediately as he quickly charged at him with a horrifying punch. With that being said, Boss 99 had been catapulted into the wall, leaving his friend anxious for his safety. Our hero was now lying on the ground, but his opponent, who knew very well that he had missed, urged him to drop the act. The man was entertained by the great battle instincts of the boy. Manhwa quickly got up and adjusted his cap. With that being said, the adult decided to proceed with introductions as he introduced himself as a graduate from the 94 promotion, Lee Manhua. All were left shocked to learn that he was a graduate from their high school, especially from the legendary 94 promotion. Our hero humbly introduced himself as well. Lee Manhua, who was intrigued by the fact that he wasn't familiar with the name of someone as powerful as the Calm Giant, immediately realized that he wasn't from their province. This excited the man even more as he urged his opponent to come closer. Seon Wook claimed that he assessed the level of his opponent based on his attacks and, having decided to take the fight seriously, he quickly closed the distance between them and asked the one who was left alerted if he was doing things the proper way. Lee Manhua was shocked to see a skill that forced him to train relentlessly while wearing weights to master the technique that the hero used, making them believe they were on par with each other, only to quickly realize that the protagonist surpassed him in the domain of speed. And with that being said, the adult man had been punched into the wall by a minor. To his men's horror, the impact was so powerful that it managed to damage the brick wall. Despite realizing that it was too late, the grown man couldn't help but smile. He was intrigued by the protagonist who only delivered one punch, making him assume that he was being mistaken for a frail old man. But the gentle giant affirmed that it was forbidden to attack someone on the ground. Despite acknowledging this sense of honor, Lee Manhua affirmed to the young one that it would cost him dearly before charging at him and delivering a quick punch. The protagonist, who dodged it and at first remained unfazed, quickly realized that his face had been injured. The pleased man then adjusted his trajectory and made a second attempt as he repeated the same attack. The third one kept on dodging the quick punches, gaining 2 more scratches on his face. He kept on evading the blows without ever fighting back. At that moment, the grown man who looked at the minor finally realized that he was slowly losing speed. Lee Manhua then placed a distance between him and his opponent by punching him so hard that the impact managed to push him a few feet away. The grown man acknowledged the power of his young opponent and left him quite shocked as he affirmed that he was the first person after his leader to make him draw his full strength. Lee Manhua urged the young one to fight seriously or risk losing his life in the face of his ultimate technique known as ultra-speed movement. Just like that, the school graduate charged at the junior as fast as a bullet. The grown man couldn't help but feel that the movements of Boss 99 lagged in speed, and just as he assumed himself to be the grand winner, he suddenly found himself in front of a punch. Our protagonist managed to smack him in the face with his technique, Quick Rebuttal. No one could believe what just happened as a grown man had been sent flying into the wall by a simple teenager. The henchmen were particularly shocked and concerned for the safety of their big brother. Lee Manhua heard from someone older who was in the Soul Crew that they had been defeated by the Phantom Crew in the capital, which was composed of 2 men who kept gaining fame throughout the entirety of Korea as the 2 legends ravaged everything in their path. No one knew about their identities or their motivations, yet the big brother in question, who was present at the scene, described the first one as an individual with a strong jaw and a laughter that sounded like machinery, and the second as someone who had a left arm covered with tattoos and an indestructible belly. Lee Manhua recognized the technique of the protagonist as a counter. Upon realizing that the protagonist fits the description of the big brother, the graduate quickly realized that he was in the presence of legends, and immediately pointed out how overwhelmed he was currently feeling. Meanwhile, his angered henchmen decided to take revenge for their fallen leader, only for Lee Manhua to ask them to cease the fight. In the end, the grown man affirmed that the children had won the fight. Shortly after, loud laughter was heard echoing through the entire building. Lee Manhua, who sat down with our heroes, was laughing his heart out. All were left baffled as the man finally understood that it was a misunderstanding on his part. He then turned to the delinquent, affirming that he wouldn't have helped him if he knew that he was the cause of the trouble. The thug chuckled anxiously. The man that many singly looked at him as he stated that he wasn't a shield to abuse. Upon hearing this, the thug was horrified. He immediately apologized with a shaking voice. Lee Manhua ordered him to stop his foolery and live an honest life, making him apologize once again. The man in charge then affirmed to him that it was the high schoolers who truly deserved an apology. And with that being said, after looking at the one he wronged so much, the man finally apologized, claiming that he exerted his anger foolishly due to the couple of bad days he just had. The boss approached the Afro and claimed that since this matter concerned him, he was to make the final judgment. With that being said, after taking a short moment to think, Daioku claimed that he was satisfied with the apology and urged the man to stop causing problems on his block. As soon as the delinquent agreed to his conditions, Seon-wook asked him to get out of the room. The thug apologized once again, but just as he was about to go on his way, he was suddenly grabbed by Lee Manhua, who threatened to personally shatter his bones if he ever went back on his words. After receiving the scare of his life, the man promised that he shall keep his word before running as fast as possible from the room. The Afro was surprised to see how quickly things had been settled. With that being said, the graduate explained to the junior that he was also at fault and gave them his card in case they ever needed his help, claiming that he would pay 2 times what he owed. He also firmly demanded that they save his number, as there would surely arrive a time when his assistance would be required. With that being said, Lee Manhua stated to his men that they should make their leave. All immediately followed the one they admired. Once the grown-ups had left, Hydra claimed that he mistook them for gangsters, which was a mistake that all juniors made. After this long day, the leader proposed that they should each go on their way, seeing how they had classes the next day. And just as young Hu was about to bid his friends farewell, Daioku decided to speak. He and his 2 friends bowed down in respect, while thanking their peers for their help. At that moment, Bullfist claimed that they should show their gratitude by giving them some time inside the computer room, but just as the Afro affirmed that this would be impossible, all were left disappointed. The leader decided to speak and inform them that friends shouldn't be so formal with each other. Young Tai then asked about their senior, who went to his other job, according to Bullfist. While on his phone, Lee Manhua was left greatly pleased as his boss had called at the right time. Meanwhile, at school, inside the conference room, a meeting was being held. The present second years looked uneasy. The third year seemed troubled, but their boss was the one that was mostly angered, seeing how the seats of their juniors were empty. One of the final years claimed that the freshmen were reckless and didn't bother to show up to meetings. Another one of the strongest claimed that they needed to be taught discipline as they were bad at collecting funds. He then turned to the 98 boss, who affirmed that the first-year transfer students he was acquainted with should arrive today. When asked if they were reliable, Chang Seog took on a dark expression before finally letting out a smile. Meanwhile, in the hallway, a boy and a girl were peacefully roaming inside the school. Both of them seemed at ease. Boss 98 reassured the rest of them, claiming that they shall soon reclaim control over the position of junior leader.